Hey, welcome back. So this video is not going to be a deep dive technical loop hop and Bo and Red Means Recording and EasyBot and all those guys do it way better than I do. This is going to be talking about some of my favorite features. Some of those features are new, some have been around since other machines, but I just want to highlight the ones that I think work particularly well or work particularly well the way they're implemented in this machine. So here we go. This is Syntakt. All right, so here we go with the Syntakt. So what is it? It's a 12 voice synthesizer. 8 of those are digital, 4 of those are analog. And Syntakt is designed so that it can stand alone as its own box. It can control other gear through Midi, up to 12 Midi tracks of sequencing, so up to 12 pieces of external gear at one time. Or it can play a role in a bigger setup. And what's great about it is that it's flexible enough so that the role that it plays can be defined by you. So some of you may be asking, if this is a Syntakt video, why is there a Digitakt in the video? One of the things that I've been seeing a lot about the Syntakt online is that it is a drum machine. And the reality is that it's a lot more than just a drum machine. And I actually won't be using it as a drum machine in my setup at the moment, in my live performance setup. So what I wanted to do was kind of scale this down to the bare minimum of the way that I use my live setup. And at the moment, the Digitakt is handling all of the drums in my setup. The Syntakt will actually be taking the place of the Digitone in my setup because I want to be able to use the 12 voices in here as 12 synth voices rather than using this as just a drum machine. So the Digitakt will continue to handle drums. And because of that, I wanted to put them together in this little walkthrough, in this little demonstration to show you a little bit about how it does play well with others and it's not just its own thing, although it very much can stand alone. So what we're going to run through in this first demonstration video is 8 of my favorite features so far. There's a whole bunch of them. Some are new, some are old, but these are the ones that I've really been loving just in the first couple days with this machine. And there will be more videos after this going through some deeper functions and some cooler functionality and some tips and tricks. But this one is to go through kind of my favorite things that I've noticed right off the bat. The first of my favorite things is the diversity of sounds that this has. So, you know, it can go everywhere from drums to melodics and kind of all over the place. And just to give you a couple of examples, I just wanted to show you some of the presets. Every sound that you'll hear in these presets is coming from inside this machine. It is made in the machine using the synth engines. There are no samples. There's no other stuff being sequenced. There's no pre-cut loops, there's no one-shots or anything like that. This is not a sampler, so the sounds that you hear are all able to be made within this machine. And as you can hear, there's some great drum sounds and it can definitely be used as a drum computer, but there's some great synth sounds as well. So being able to do melodic things, stabs, there's kind of that trumpet sounding thing in there. All of those sounds are created within the Syntakt. A lot of really cool retro sound. Now, one of the interesting things about that actual pattern that was right there, it actually demonstrates one of the features that we'll talk about a little bit later, which is sound locking and parameter locking. So it allows you to, on one track, have a bunch of different sounds as long as they're from that same engine. So I just wanted to mute everything except for track 1 so that you could hear just what's happening on that one track. So you can hear that different steps are locked to different sounds within that one track. I don't know if it's just me, but when I heard that one for the first time, I couldn't help but think of Depeche Mode. So you can hear some of the kind of cool LFO action going on in the background. One of the things that's really interesting about this preset, it really demonstrates the fact that this can be very melodic, including kind of longer sounds and not just kind of percussive melodic sounds. And if you mute out the two main drum tracks and just play the melodics, you can really hear that. So that's it playing without any of the drums, so you can see how really melodic this machine can be. That preset is called 808 for very obvious reasons, but you can see you can go from very modern to very retro. There's all sorts of sounds that you can create within this machine. It's not just samples that you've loaded in from somewhere else. Every one of these sounds, again, is made inside the machine. Just a couple of others that I think show some real diversity within the machine. And one more. Okay, so now let's just get a little bit more into what the Syntakt can do on its own. The idea that all of the machines can be really melodic or sound like drums is great because it means that you can design your own sounds. One of the biggest differences between the Syntakt and the Digitakt and the Octatrack and a bunch of others is the fact that these are samplers, so you're going to be sampling somebody else's sound. You're going to be taking a sound from a vinyl record or maybe from a loop site like Loop Masters or Splice or something like that, and or maybe you're making your own, which is a fun thing to do as well. But then you're going to be loading those sounds in here, and that's going to be the sound that you play. And you can tweak some things like filters and effects and things like that, but you're not actually creating the sound. You're using an already created sound. What's interesting about the Syntakt is that every single one of the 12 tracks you can use to create your own sounds. And one of the coolest things about the sound design feature in this is the ability to randomize, to create sounds from random. Okay, so let's just start off with a new pattern. So hit pattern, we're going to go to 2. This is kind of the initialized pattern. These are the sounds that you get. That's where every pattern opens up and starts with, but there's nothing that says you have to use those sounds. So what we'll do is, let's go into track 1 here. If we go into double click synth, then we have the choice of a bunch of different drum synths, cymbals, claps, things like that. And then down in the lower part, we have actual synths. One that's called bits. Then we have the chord engine. Then we have the one that's just called tone. And this is a basic FM synthesis engine. And then we have one that's deceptively called toy. And I can, I guess, hear why, but it actually has a ton of power and a ton of parameters that you can adjust. So let's start off with the tone engine first, because this one's a lot of fun to play around with. So here right now, there's kind of a bassy sound in there. But if you hit function and then turn this encoder, you get into the sound browser. And so you can go through, you can actually sort these sounds or filter them based on the type of sound that you want to hear. So right now, let's go in and let's listen to some synth sounds. So everything that will be in the menu now that we've filtered it is going to be a synth sound. So let's just start with this one. So kind of an interesting sound. We can tune it. We can adjust the ratio between the two different waveforms, the one that's modulating the other, because it is FM. We can adjust the punch, which is basically like a compressor type punch. Then we've also got the decay. We can adjust the feedback. and the modulation between the two waves. And the envelope. And then we have an overdrive. So once we have a sound that we're interested in, then we can start to shape it more with the filter. Again, another thing that I really love about the Elektron devices is that the pages are one click. A lot of devices can get to be really menu divey when they have a ton of parameters. And I love the way that Elektron kind of integrates this stuff in. So trig is everything about the trigger that you put there. Synth is everything about the synth that you're doing. Then you've got a filter page. There's a second filter as well. There's a bass width filter. Then you have your amp page that has your delay and your reverb, as well as your amp envelope and your panning control. And then there's in the back on the second page, there's the send for the effects block, which we'll talk later. And then you have one LFO with one click and the second LFO with the second click. So all of those are right here, readily available. You don't have to go through a bunch of menus to get to what you want. You've got them all one touch. Another thing, if you're not familiar with the Elektron workflow, let's say in this synth engine, you'll notice that over here you have two functions. The bottom one that can be controlled, which is the level, is controlled by this over here. And the top one just tells you which track and pattern that you're on. But then you'll notice next to that, you have 8 different functions. There's a row of 4 and a row of 4. And that will always correspond with the 8 knobs that are on this side. So whatever page you're on. So if you go to the trig page, there's 8, there's 8. Synth page, there's 8, there's 8. Filter, there's 8, there's 8. So it basically gives you a really easy way to know exactly where you are with whatever's on the screen. Goes along with it. And then you go to the next page, go to the LFO, which could be really super complicated in some synthesizers. And here you've got speed, you've got the multiplier, you've got the fade in and out, you've got the destination, you've got your depth, you've got the mode for the type of LFO you want it to be. You have the start phase for your waveform, and then you get to select your waveform. So it's pretty easy to jump right in and start doing things. Even if you don't know what's going on and you're new to synthesis, you don't have to know what something is to then dive into the menu to set a bunch of parameters. You've got 8 things here, you've got 8 knobs, and you can just jump right into those. One of the other cool things about the sound engine in this is the idea that you can randomize. So any of these pages of 8 functions can be randomized just by hitting the key that you want to go to that page and hold that down and hit yes. So for example, with the synth engine, this is the sound we have, but if I hit synth or hold synth and hit yes, now we have a different sound that's been randomly generated. It's not a new preset, it's a random new sound. And again, and one thing that doesn't adjust when you're doing that is the tune. So if you've already tuned this, to where you want it in your track. When you hit randomize, it randomizes the parameters of the synth, but not the tune. So it's very interesting. If you kind of get writer's block and you're stuck and you're not sure what to do, you can go into that randomize function and start designing a new sound. And if you get something that's kind of close to something that you like, but you're not, you want to adjust it, then you can start tweaking from there. So then you go so you can then customize it any way you like. And that function works for every one of the pages. So if if you have your synth that you like here, then you go into the filter page, but you want to mess with that, you can hold down filter and hit yes, and it randomizes the ADSR envelope. it randomizes the envelope amount, it randomizes the type of filter and the frequency of the filter and the resonance. So now that sounds like this. And let's say you like this one. Now you can start messing around with it. And if you don't like it, just go ahead and randomize again. So again, great for writer's block, great for messing around with stuff. So it's a great tool for people who are new, but also for producers or performers that have been doing this for a while, and you just get stuck sometimes and you just want to, get an idea. It's kind of like roll the dice and see what comes up and go, okay, I can take this somewhere, and then you move on from there. From a performance standpoint, one of the things that I love about this randomize function too, and using it on this machine, this has the same functionality as the Digitakt and the Digatone, which is that you can save a pattern at any point in your performance by hitting function and yes, and that will save every setting the way that it is. Then you can go in and randomize and tweak filters and move things around and adjust your sequence and do all sorts of things. And then if you hit function no, it reloads that pattern to the safe state where you were before. So I'll give you an example of this. So let's say that's your pattern just on these two tracks right now. We'll hit function and yes, we'll save that to, and it says here pattern saved to temporary area. So then what you can do is while you're playing, I can go into each one of those tracks and start messing around with stuff. So everything's now all messed up, but if I hit function and no, it'll reload back to the original safe state of the pattern. So you notice not only does it reload all the settings that you tweak, but if you changed anything in your sequencer, which is something that I do live because my sets are all improvised. So I'll go in and I'll be messing with things and I'm sequencing stuff on the fly while I'm performing. And so what this does is this gives me a safe state that I can always come back to. So let's say I go into a break and I take out the drums and it's a big break and I want to start messing with different stuff. I can take in and out instruments and mute different things and unmute things and tweak different parameters. And then when it comes time to go back into the main part of the song, I can reload the pattern and I'm right back to where I was before. That's possible to do on the Syntakt, and it's something that borrowed from the Digitakt and the Digatone, and one of my favorite functionalities about these machines. So one of the other great functionalities that the Syntakt has is the keyboard mode. So if you hit function and track, which is keyboard, all these, the red ones that are written underneath the buttons is what will happen if you hit function and that key together. So it's like your key combination shortcuts. So if you hit function and track, that takes you to keyboard mode. If you long press track, it takes you to this keyboard kind of setup mode where you can define a scale. You can define the root note. The Syntakt has a really cool function that the others don't yet. I'm assuming this will probably show up in an upcoming update, but you can fold the keyboard. So traditionally, when you're in keyboard mode, you have what would be a chromatic keyboard. So that would be normally the way it would work. So you've got white keys on the bottom, black keys on the top. Because it's set to a scale, you only have the keys lit, which you can do. But if you don't set it to a scale, you can have a full chromatic keyboard. What this has is the ability to fold the keyboard. So if you just turn this encoder and turn fold on, you'll notice all the lights change. Now what this is 2 octaves, one on the bottom, one on the top of that key with that root note that you had decided there. So now you've got a C minor scale on the bottom and another C minor on the top. And there are over 30 different scales that you can do within this, which is really interesting. So you've got some really interesting ones that you wouldn't normally play maybe if you're not a keyboard player. So you've got like a traditional blues scale, but then you've also got things like the Persian scale. So it allows for some really interesting experimentation. Another one of the new features that I really love in the Syntakt is the effects block. So if you hit function and effects, that takes you to the analog effects block, an overdrive, multi-mode filter, and an amp envelope that are insert effects for every one of the channels in the machine. So if we go back to this page, you'll see that we have the keys lined up just like they are down here. And each one of those is the individual track. So you can decide which track you want to route through this analog effects block. So you can use it for anything that you want to. So for example, right now we have these 3 tracks going through it and the reverb going through it. And what we have it set up to do is a little bit of overdrive, and that's it, just on this. So what I was using when I was messing around with this was I was using that effects block just as a final analog overdrive to drive a few of the sounds. So I just routed certain ones through that and not others because it didn't have a positive impact on the other sounds. So next I want to talk about the assignable MIDI tracks. So right now we've got other sounds on our first tracks here, but let's say we want another synthesizer to come join us in the mix here. So let's bring out the old SH01A here to get some classic techno sounds. So let's say we want to use track number 6. Right now it's set up as a clap, so it's kind of a default. So all we need to do now to switch this over to a MIDI track is double click on synth, go all the way down to the bottom of list of synth engines, and the bottom one is MIDI, hit yes, and now that's a MIDI track. Next, we need to assign the channel that we want this to speak to another synth on. I know that my SH01A is set up to listen on channel 2. So what we want to do is hit function and press the first encoder where it says channel. And that's going to give you the option to select a channel from 1 to 16, a MIDI channel. So we're going to select channel 2 because we know that that's what this is, and hit yes. Now channel 6 is ready to speak to our outboard synth. So then all we need to do is connect a MIDI out to the MIDI in on the Roland. Turn it on. We're going to connect our output, and we're going to actually bring the output from the Roland back into the input of the Syntakt. Then if you hit function LFO 2-3 times, so it goes through the 2 mixer pages of the tracks you have here on the front, and then it gets you to the external mixer page. It says in LR, so that's in, left, and right, and then you can set the level that you want for your incoming synth. So we'll put that all the way up to the top, and then you have delay and reverb and panning and things like that for this outboard synth as well. So now this is all ready to go. So we're on track 6. If we hit this now, that sound is being generated by the SH01. It's being sent from here via MIDI to here, triggering this, and then the audio is coming back into the Syntakt, and we can use it on that channel. So then if we go to our keyboard mode, now we have a chromatic keyboard where we can play our outboard synth. Now we can play this outboard synth and sequence it from in here. So if we want to sequence something that's on that track, we just go hit record, and now we can step sequence. We can select the length we want the pattern. Let's just do 4 bars. Now, if we want to sequence in a couple of different just random note hits, we can do that. And then we can go ahead and change these on our trigger menu to different notes. So if we want to sequence in like that, we can. If we don't want to sequence in like that, we can go back over here to keyboard mode. And if you hit record and play together, now you're going to live record this in and it's going to keep looping it back over again. So we do. So you can see it's very easy to connect external gear. It's very easy to control it from this. And that is now the sequence that is on track 6. Something else that's really interesting with the Syntakt and the flexibility to be able to flip these tracks from MIDI to synth tracks and back and forth is the fact that, let's say we sequence something on this synthesizer, which we just did, and we decide, you know what, I don't really like the sound of that. I want to use one of the internal synth engines. So we're still on track 6. We just hit synth twice. Then we go back up and let's say we want to select our chord engine. Hit yes. Now that sequence that we just put in will play with the chord engine. And if we want to go and adjust some of the and let's say, you know, we want on this trigger, we want the filter to open up. So we just parameter lock that to that one trigger. And now we can get that. So you can see it's very easy to go in and edit. And also the exact same thing can be done in reverse. So on track 9 here, we have a bass line. So you go to synth twice, scroll down, hit MIDI, yes. Go back into our channel, tell it to send to channel 2 again, because that's what the SH01 is listening on. Hit yes, and now that same bass pattern will play with this synth. And so if we don't like that and we want to go back to our old bass line, hit synth twice. We go back to our dual VCO. Hit yes. And now we're right back to our old bass line that we had on our 2 oscillator analog internal synthesizer. So very easy to flip back and forth from audio track to MIDI track to audio track, and change it up any way you like. Now, just really quickly, let's talk about a practical use for this. One of the things that I love about this, and it's actually what I use my Deluge for normally, is if I was to take this as a portable box, like I wanted to go take this to the park and run it off of a battery pack with a ripcord or something and just make up some stuff. I can write tracks in here. I can sketch out ideas on here. And if I get back into my studio and I say, you know what, that bass line's cool and all, but I have a subsequent 37 here that I think that would sound really great on. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just connect that via MIDI, change this to a MIDI track, send that to there and record that into my DAW to use in my track that I want to do. And I could do that with every single one of the 12 tracks. I could route it to 12 pieces of external gear. So I could sketch using the internal engines and then mix and match with internal engines and outboard synthesizers kind of to my heart's content. Next up, another one of my favorite features, and we just touched on it really quickly, or at least part of it, and that's the parameter locking piece. But you can actually sound lock in this, which is a lot of fun. We'll make this be a tone engine. So it's generating a tone for us. Open that filter back up. So we've got kind of a cool tone. And let's say we want to step sequence in a few things with that tone. Let's just put in a couple of random things and hit play. Now, one thing that you've seen already is that you can just hold down a trigger, and if you go to the trig menu, you can change the note. So we can change this to here. Okay, so that's the first kind of locking parameters. But what's really cool about this is that you can lock the sound as well, as long as the sound that you want comes from the engine that you're using. And if you hit function and sound browser, we can go through and find it's giving us options of other sounds that we can lock to that step. So now this step has a different sound from the other one. So if you listen when we play it, let's say we want that to also filter. And that's cool and all, but what if we wanted to put that somewhere else? Well, if you just hold this down and hit copy, and then go to a different step and hit paste, and then hit here and hit paste, play again. So just to give you an idea, now where this gets really powerful, when you are using this as a drum machine, being able to, what I love to do is use it for percussion. So let's go into our engines again, and let's go pick one of the percussion engines. So now, this is our percussion sound that we've got right now. So if we enter in some triggers for that, just random ones. Now, we can parameter lock different things for different steps, as you've seen before. So if we want to change the filter on this one and add a little bit more filter envelope. Or let's say on that same step, we want to have it add a whole bunch of reverb and delay just to that one step. Hold this down. Do the reverb and delay, and you see the highlight box that shows up around it. That means that that's a parameter that's been locked. So when you let this off, if you go to another trig, you won't see it. But when you go to that one, you can see which parameters have been locked. So listen to it now. So it added in the reverb, but not as much delay as we wanted. So let's do a little more. So let's just add a different sound in here. So now, if we listen, so we've locked a totally different sound to that one step. Now, finally, the last thing that we didn't talk about, because I didn't want to get too into the drum side of this, because I feel like that's what everybody thinks this begins and ends with, being a drum machine. And I wanted to show off a little bit of what it does that's not drum machine. But one of the other things that's one of my favorite features is the drum synthesis of this. So let's go to a new track here. And this one, I just loaded in a classic or a hard kick drum. There's classic, FM. And these are not presets. These are the sound engines. These are the machines that the sound comes from. So what this does is this allows you a different type of oscillator and a different type of synthesizer to create the different sounds. So the snare drum are different. Then you've got rim shots, noise, to be able to do cymbals and things like that. And then just an impulse if you want to add that for effect to different things. So if you, let's go into this, let's go to the classic kick drum, and we'll assign that. So that's our classic kick drum. So just to get started, let's do a 4 on the floor classic kick drum. Bring it down to, So you can see, so we've got a classic kick drum here, 4 on the floor, and it's just a basic sine wave. But you've got all of these parameters where you can actually create a kick drum with this. So we can tune it. We can change the sweep time. We can change the hold. Make it a little broader, like more 808 style. Change the sweep depth. So you've got your sweep time and your depth. Then you have your decay, how long you want it to ring out. So if you want to do big fat round 808 sounds, you can. If you want to go back into tighter 909 sounds, you can do that as well. You could actually change the bass wave. This is being based off of a sine wave right now. But you can do triangle. Let's go back to the sine wave like that. Then you've got the ability to adjust the transient. And you can actually tune the transient as well. And adjust how much of that little click that you want at the beginning of your sound. And then you've got an overdrive so that you can power this up. Just the volume down as we go up in overdrive. So you can create big, fat, hardstyle kicks, or you can mellow it out and create some really mellow sounding kicks. And that's just the kick drum. You can do this with all different types of engines. Now, if we go through this kick drum that we set up here, and then we change to a different kind of root drum synthesizer sound, we can build totally different drums depending on where we start. And then once you have your bass sound that you like, then you can start to shape it with, you've got your filter and your amp. So you can shape a whole bunch of things on these kicks and get lost in this for hours and hours. One of the things that I like to do, a little trick that I like to do with kick drums to give them a little bit more low end punch, is to put a high pass filter on them. Yes, you heard that correctly, a high pass filter, and bring it all the way down to kind of low mid 20s. So you're not really cutting off many frequencies in the low end from the drum. So it's frequencies that you wouldn't normally hear anyway because they're so low and so subby. And then if you boost the resonance, that gives you a resonant boost right before the cutoff. So it gives you some real beef and fatness in the low end of your kicks. So if you like the sound of that drum, you can then save that as an internal patch or an internal preset. And this unit can save 2,000 plus internal patches or presets. So you can go crazy with the sound design, designing your own drums, your own cymbals, your own snares, your own percussion elements, and all those things. And you can organize them all in here, and then you can come back to them, and that can be part of your kind of signature sound that you use with this drum synth. All right, so now just to show you really quickly, finally, how these kind of work together. All of the melodic stuff that you'll hear will be coming from this side. All the drums you hear will be coming from this side. Don't forget to tune in on Sunday nights when I post each week a live techno jam. And it's going to be something that's new and that I'm working on that week, and it'll be with these machines and the rest of my live performance setup. I hope you got something great out of this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and make the algorithm happy, and subscribe if you aren't already. And hopefully I'll see you back in the next video. Thanks so much for watching, and take care of each other.